We'll spend a few minutes on legislative and legal issues. Over the past year, there's been much discussion, initially raised by a handful of MAC area towns over governance of the CRRA. It's an appropriate discussion because we are, well, perhaps for two reasons. One is there were communications issues, which I frankly think we've done quite a bit to alleviate. But secondly, we're at a turning point. CRRA is changing from a project-based organization to a statewide agency serving towns on an as-needed or as-requested basis. So there are some potential opportunities to change how the CRRA is governed. Right now we have 11 board members chosen by statewide leaders, the governor and the 4 legislative leaders from both sides of the aisle. A couple of CEOs, chief elected officials from the Mid-Con region would like to consider some changes to that, including limiting the governor's and legislative leaders' authorities, dropping the mandates for finance, environment and energy experience by certain members of the board, assuring some sort of regional representation and guaranteeing a seat for the city of Hartford, and addressing the fact that right now there is a split between towns, large towns, which are more than 50,000, and small towns, which are less than 50,000. The thought is that dividing line is probably best at 30,000. Better reflect the diversity of the state. Yes, Don?
I'm Don Stein, Town of Park Hampstead, and Tom Gormley and I chair the subcommittee that looked at the governance issue. The only comment I would like to make is that Mr. Kirk said that a few CEOs recommend. The reality is that the Mid-Con project and the Municipal Advisory Committee passed this with only 2 dissenters, and those dissenters were not necessarily opposed to changing the governance. They were in favor of keeping the expertise on the new board. So I just wanted to reflect that it was not just a couple of CEOs, but it was the general vote by the Municipal Advisory Committee.
Yes, I stand corrected. The subcommittee of the MAC did provide this this concept to the board at the last board meeting, and there was some discussion on it. The board, but I don't want to imply that there isn't significant support for some of these changes on the MAC committee. It certainly is. A couple of notes about board members. Frankly, we've never had a lot of people standing in line to be board members of the CRRA. It's not been one of those plum assignments to volunteer for. One of the things to remember is the CRRA board fiduciary responsibility is to the entire state as a state agency. That's an important concern. When Mike Pace, as chairman, comes up to chair a meeting, he's representing the CRRA and the state, not the town of Old Saybrook. His perspective as a first selectman on the town of Old Saybrook is critically important, and an important reason the present statutes require first selectmen and city managers to be on the board, but his fiduciary responsibility is very clear, and the AG has weighed in on this. It's to the CRRA and to the state. Current board workload is about 20 hours a month. I think most board members would agree that that's about what it takes to read all of the crap we send out every week and to sit in on typically 2.
Yes.
It's typically 2 or 3 committee meetings per month as well. It's not a job for the faint of heart, but I think every one of these board members will tell you it's enormously rewarding because we've been very successful and continue to be so. The CRRA board and the CEOs that Don and Tom Gormley from Middlebury, who was here as well, the 2 subcommittee chairmen of the MAC committee, hopefully will be able to work on to develop a consensus proposal for consideration by the legislature. The idea is if the CRA board, the MAC committee, the CRRA committee, the CRRA committee, all the towns can say, this is the way we recommend the legislature should change governance. The hope is the legislature will look at that and say, if everybody's happy with this, we'll go ahead and change it. The feedback I've gotten from the legislative leaders has been cautiously optimistic. They're interested in seeing what the CRRA board and its member towns can provide as a suggestion, but they are, as you'd expect, very protective of their appointing authority. I think it may be tough to ask them to give up their ability to be able to appoint the members of this critical state agency. That said, our job in the next few weeks and months is to come up with a substantially agreeable consensus on how to affect and modify the governance of the CRRA. A couple other legislative issues. Bottle bill expansion. We're hoping these two are dead, but they would expand bottle bill to include non-carbonated drinks, teas, sports drinks, etc. Just thinking back a couple of years, what happened when they put the deposit on water bottles, we lost $150,000. Okay, our amount of PET plastic water bottles dropped like a rock when they started charging a deposit on it. Now, two things happened. People started buying a whole lot more water, or buying it in New Jersey, and people started returning bottles to those reverse vending machines. From an environmental standpoint, any environmental engineer will tell you it's a dumb idea. It hurts the environment to use reverse vending. We have single stream and dual stream trucks running up and down. 96% of every, driving by 96% of every resident's home in Connecticut. There's no reason to have people go in their car and drive their water bottles to Stop and Shop. However, in their wisdom, the legislature decided to add those water bottles to the deposit regime, and that has affected your rebate. It's smaller because of it, and we would hope that they would not compound that problem with additional deposit demands. Another issue that we're hoping to have the legislature consider is redefinition of Class 1 renewables. Electric providers across the state are required to provide their customers with a certain percentage of their, with electricity that has a certain percentage of renewable components. That amount is going to be growing up to about 20% by the year 2020, I believe. There are two types of renewable components, Class 1 and Class 2. Trash to energy is presently a Class 2, and there's virtually no price premium for Class 2. CLP and United Illuminating have to go out there and buy that renewable power, and they end up buying it from Massachusetts and Maine and New Hampshire instead of here in Connecticut. We would like two things to happen. One is we'd like the legislature to require them to buy it in Connecticut, as Massachusetts requires Boston Edison to buy it in Massachusetts. But importantly, we would like our trash to energy, the largest source of renewable energy in New England, to be characterized as a Class 1 renewable. It would increase our electric revenue very, very substantially. It would not increase power prices because they have to buy this renewal anyway. Why not buy it from us? Allow us to enjoy that money instead of those people up in Massachusetts. Adding just 2 cents a kilowatt, which would be a very modest amount for the Class 1 RECs, as they're called, would reduce our tip fee by $10 a ton. So it's, we're asking the legislature to consider adding us to SB 102, which is a bill that provides those renewable credits for public wastewater treatment facilities.
The virtual net metering would allow you to get the credits at one location and use them at another.
That could be
It would have to be contiguous with the generation site, so something you might want to keep an eye on.
We do try and keep an eye on all of this because, and when the time comes, we won't hesitate to blast you with an email saying, please talk to your legislator, that this is important and could save the town some money. There's another bill out there on privatization. Frankly, we think this one probably has lost its momentum because, well, we talked to the sponsor, and I think he now better understands the situation. But CRRA is required by a statute to use private contractors. It's clear as day in the statutes. Our O&M agreements at the Mid-Con facility are expiring. We did a very exhaustive procurement process, guided in part by specific language in our statute, but mostly by the procedures outlined by the board about 8 or 9 years ago. The end result is that procurement process had us replacing 2 legacy contractors, original contractors, at the WPF, PBF, and EGF, the Mid-Con facility, with a single contractor. The transition will begin this summer, but essentially the WPF agreement expires in December of this year, and the EGF-PBF agreement expires in May of the following year. You should see, this should be completely opaque to you. You should see no impact at all due to this transition. There will be a handoff of responsibilities. And importantly, for the folks that have been working hard on these projects all these years, the new contractor, at our insistence, will be guaranteeing a job to all of the present workers in all of those facilities at the same pay rate. So this is the important note for you. You should see no difference at all. Your trucks will drop off with garbage just on Monday, just as they did the previous week. Might be a different person riding the loader. Might even be the same guy with a different uniform on. But there will be no impact to you. Another legal issue we have to deal with is there's an arbitration demand by one of our contractors. There is a MDC, our contractor, claims CRRA is responsible for certain costs as a result of the expiration of the present contract. That's in arbitration according to our agreement. We take everything to arbitration. It does save a little bit of money over a court process, but still very, very expensive. We do have the responsibility to pay both sides of that arbitration. That was a contractual legacy of the original agreement as well. It's unfortunate to have to spend this money. I mean, it's real dollars and does impact the tip fee, but it's an important question that we have to resolve. And there's a second lawsuit which is unfortunately also costing us quite a bit of money. This is over the proper execution of the recent market-based bidding of our operations and maintenance contract. MDC is suing us for over that process. MDC was a disappointed bidder. It did participate in the process, but was not found to be the highest value bidder. Case is scheduled, it's on a very fast track, scheduled for trial in May. We expect to prevail. There will be no changes in the MSA as a result of this. You can sign that with confidence. If we expect to prevail, but if we have to repeat the process, we will. Once again, the defense costs are pretty significant there.